You ever feel like everything you were taught about history might be a lie? Like the story you believe doesn't add up, and you're left wondering what really happened? In this video, we're going to tear open the hidden history of the Americas before Columbus, the explorers no one talks about, the civilizations erased, and the truths that textbooks skipped. By the end, you'll learn who actually crossed the Atlantic long before 1492, how evidence, bones, murals, and plants challenges the official story, why history remembers conquerors, not the quiet builders, how power, bias, and survival shaped the stories we accept as truth. Stay with me, because once you see this, your understanding of history and the way the world really works will never be the same. Chapter 1. You ever feel that quiet itch when a story sounds too neat? Like it was polished for comfort, not truth? That's where we start. You were told a man arrived, planted a flag, and history began. Simple, proud, convenient. But you know this already. Nothing real starts that clean. This might sound bad, even disrespectful, but stay with me. A land cannot be discovered if someone is already standing there, watching the sails approach. That word hides something. It hides violence, ownership, and the need to be first. History, when written by power, prefers straight lines. Stoicism teaches you to look past the noise and ask, what is, not what flatters. And what is here is a pattern. Empires don't just conquer land, they conquer memory. Here's the psychological twist. Studies on memory by Frederick Bartlett in 1932 found that humans reshape stories to fit existing beliefs. Not because they're evil, because order feels safer than chaos. So myths survive, messy truths don't. This isn't about guilt, it's about attention. When you reduce history to one hero, you erase thousands of quiet crossings, slow trades, shared wins. You replace movement with a moment, and moments are easy to worship. This is for educational purposes only, but understand this. The first lie you inherit is never about facts. It's about identity. Ask yourself this: if the story were wider, older, darker, would you feel smaller or finally honest? Because the real danger isn't that you were lied to, it's that the lie felt useful, and useful lies are the hardest to unlearn. Chapter 2. Let me ask you something you've never been invited to ask. Why do we assume the sea waited patiently for one ship? Think about it. Water has no borders. Waves don't recognize flags. And long before maps were tidy, people learned to read wind like instinct. This might look devilish to say, but here's the calm truth. Sailing is not genius, it's patience plus repetition. You don't need destiny. You need time. Long before the age of cannons and contracts, African coasts were alive with movement. Trade, curiosity, survival. The Stoic mind understands this. Humans move when stillness becomes costly. Archaeological and botanical studies later found plants on both sides of the Atlantic that shouldn't have met by accident. Bottle gourds, yams, plantains that cannot survive saltwater drifting. These are not symbols. They are logistics. Someone carried them, carefully. Psychology has a word for what happens next. Confirmation bias. Peter Wayson's work in 1960 showed people favor evidence that supports what they already believe. So when proof doesn't fit the story of European primacy, it gets labeled coincidence or ignored. But the ocean doesn't care about your narrative. Currents move whether you name them or not. The Canary Current, the equatorial flow, natural highways running west. Marcus Aurelius said to observe how things work, not how you wish they worked. If a route exists, someone eventually walks it. So ask yourself, is it really shocking that people crossed? Or only shocking that they weren't the people you were taught to expect? History isn't silent, it's selective. And once you notice that, the water starts speaking. Chapter 3. You ever notice how truth gets quiet right before it gets dismissed? No argument, just a pause, then a shrug. That's not logic. That's discomfort. Here's the thing most people don't want to sit with. Evidence doesn't always arrive as ruins and crowns. Sometimes it shows up as language, habits, or metal in the wrong place. This might sound inconvenient, but follow the thread. When unfamiliar alloys appeared in the Caribbean, they weren't myths. They were tested, measured, matched. Metallurgists found combinations already known elsewhere, far across the water. Same ratios, same purpose, different shore. Now pause. If that makes you uneasy, ask why. Psychology helps here. Leon Festinger's 1957 work on cognitive dissonance showed that when facts threaten identity, people don't reject the self. They reject the facts. Not loudly, politely. Stoicism doesn't ask you to defend pride. It asks you to defend reality. Language does this too. Place names, words that shouldn't echo each other. Yet they do. Not perfectly. Nothing human ever does. But close enough to raise questions. And questions are dangerous when power prefers certainty. Here's the warning, and yes, this is for educational purposes only. Dismissing evidence because of who it benefits is still denial, even when denial wears academic clothing. Think of history like a courtroom where only one witness was allowed to speak. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means exclusion. So ask yourself honestly, if the evidence were pointing elsewhere, would you follow it? Or would you quietly look away, hoping the discomfort passes? Because that moment, that hesitation, that's where history really gets decided. Chapter 4. Let me ask you something that hits closer than history. Who decides which version of your past survives? Because memory isn't neutral, it's curated. This might sound harsh, but understand the mechanism. Conquest doesn't end when the fighting stops. Continues in textbooks, monuments, holidays. Control the story. Control the future. Niccolò Machiavelli said that people judge more by the eye than the hand. What they see repeated becomes truth. What they don't see might as well never have happened. When one voyage arrives with paperwork, weapons, and a crown's blessing, it drowns out quieter journeys. Trade leaves fewer records than invasion. Peace doesn't archive itself. Psychologists call this availability bias. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in 1973 found that people estimate truth based on how easily examples come to mind. So the best documented story wins, not the most accurate. That's why Columbus remains large in memory. Not because he was first, because he was backed. Stoicism teaches restraint here. You don't rage at the pattern. You study it. Power prefers clean narratives. Complexity threatens authority. Here's the uncomfortable part. When millions die from disease, displacement, and silence, there are fewer voices left to argue their version. Erasure becomes easy when witnesses are gone. This isn't about replacing one hero with another. It's about noticing how easily absence becomes proof. Ask yourself, if history were written by those who traded, not those who conquered, what would your map look like? Because what we call memory is often just survival plus ink. Chapter 5. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you look at a face from the past, do you see a person or a problem? Because interpretation is rarely innocent. Across the Americas, stone faces stare back at the ocean. Heavy jaws, wide noses, helmets carved with care. They don't whisper, they wait. This might sound bad, but notice the reflex. When features don't match expectation, explanations shrink. They become accidents, babies, stylization, anything but intention. Psychology has a name for this implicit bias. Mazarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald showed in the late 1990s that people unconsciously associate value with familiarity. What looks out of place feels wrong, even when evidence is solid. Stoicism urges discipline here. See what is, not what flatters your inheritance. Those heads required planning, labor, and obedience. 6 tons of stone moved for faces meant to last. You don't do that for caricature. You do that for memory. Here's the negative truth we avoid. If those faces matter, then so do the people they resemble. And that complicates the story. So alternatives appear. Aliens, lost continents, anything distant enough to keep the mirror away. This is not about proving identity through stone. It's about recognizing avoidance. Ask yourself, Why is it easier to imagine the impossible than to accept the familiar in the wrong place? Because the past doesn't just ask to be studied. It asks to be acknowledged. And acknowledgement, for many, feels like loss. But it isn't. It's accuracy. The video is half finished. If you like the video, be sure to comment and watch the next steps. Chapter 6. Let me ask you something most people avoid. How many truths disappear simply because no one returned to report them? We respect survivors. We doubt the lost. This might sound cold, but history has a survival bias. If you don't come back, your story weakens. Not because it's false, because it lacks witnesses. There are accounts of fleets launched westward, provisioned for years, pushed by curiosity and pressure. Not conquest, exploration without applause. The kind that doesn't promise return. One ship came back. The rest vanished into a moving ocean that looked like a river without banks. Stoicism understands this silence. Not every effort produces recognition. Some acts exist only in intention and consequence. Modern psychology echoes this pattern. Nassim Taleb later described how history favors visible outcomes over unseen attempts. We mistake absence of proof for proof of absence. That mistake feels rational. It isn't. Ocean currents don't reward courage. They test it. The equatorial flow doesn't care who you are. Carries everyone the same. Here's the part that unsettles people. If those ships made landfall and never returned, their success would look exactly like failure to us. No flags, no records, only influence that blends in over generations. Ask yourself, how many human efforts have shaped the world without ever earning a name? Because history isn't built only by those who arrived loudly. It's also shaped by those who left quietly and trusted the wind. And sometimes, that's enough. Chapter 7. Let me ask you something that cuts through theory. What if the proof isn't written? What if it's buried? Bones don't argue. They wait. Across the Americas, remains have been found that don't sit comfortably inside the expected timeline. Different traits, different patterns, dated earlier than the stories we repeat. This might sound disturbing, but understand the resistance. Human beings trust documents more than flesh. Paper feels orderly. Bodies feel accusatory. Studies on authority by Stanley Milgram in 1963 showed how people defer to sanction systems even against direct evidence. In history, the system is the textbook. If bones disagree, bones lose. Stoicism asks you to reverse that habit. Nature doesn't lie to protect reputations. Here's the negative reality. Classification has always been political. Who gets labeled native, foreign, or impossible depends on who is asking. So remains get reinterpreted. Dates get debated. Context gets narrowed. Not fraud. Caution. But caution can become avoidance. Think of it like this. If your body were found 1,000 years from now, would strangers understand who you were, or force you into a box that made them comfortable? Ask yourself, why do we demand overwhelming proof for some possibilities and accept thin narratives for others? Because certainty is cheaper than honesty, and the ground beneath us knows more than we're ready to admit. Chapter 8. Let me ask you something quietly dangerous. What if the story you defend isn't true, but it keeps you calm? Because comfort is persuasive, more persuasive than facts. This might sound cynical, but sit with it. Societies don't preserve truth first. They preserve stability. Anything that threatens the center gets labeled fringe. History follows the same instinct as the mind. Protect the ego. Reduce tension. Move on. Psychology calls this system justification. John Jost's research in 2001 found that people are motivated to defend existing structures, even when those structures disadvantage them. Not stupidity, self-soothing. Stoicism doesn't attack this impulse. It exposes it. If the past becomes more complex, the present feels less righteous. Heroes blur. Moral certainty weakens. Here's the uncomfortable line. Many people don't reject alternative histories because they're false. They reject them because they demand humility. Because if discovery becomes shared, then superiority dissolves. So the mind does what it always does under pressure. It simplifies. It mocks. It calls curiosity agenda. Think about this. When someone laughs at the idea of ancient crossings, are they protecting truth or protecting identity? Ask yourself, if the story changed tomorrow, would your life lose meaning? If the answer is yes, that's not history talking. That's fear. And fear, no matter how educated, is never a good historian. Chapter 9. Let me ask you something that doesn't get asked enough. After destruction, what actually remains? Not the buildings, not the names, patterns. Empires burn records. Disease erases voices. Violence scatters memory. But habits linger. Words echo. Seeds grow where they shouldn't. This might sound subtle, but subtle things last longer. After contact, after collapse, after forced silence, you still find rhythms that don't belong to the official story. Farming methods that feel borrowed. Symbols that feel familiar in the wrong soil. Music that moves in circles older than borders. Stoicism teaches endurance over display. What survives isn't what shouts loudest. It's what adapts quietly. Anthropologists have long noticed cultural persistence after trauma. Not as resistance, as inertia. People keep what works when everything else fails. Here's the hard truth. When 90% of a population disappears, continuity doesn't look clean. It looks fragmented, misattributed, renamed. So later historians say, coincidence, convergence, independent invention. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes that explanation is just easier to digest. Ask yourself this. If fragments of an older world survived inside a newer one, how would you recognize them without already believing they were possible? That's the paradox. You need openness to see evidence, but evidence is what people demand before opening. Fire destroys detail, but it can't erase influence. And influence, unlike glory, doesn't ask permission to exist. Chapter 10. Let me ask you the only question that really matters now. What do you do once the story cracks? Because this was never just about who arrived first. It was about how you relate to truth. When it unsettles you, this might sound blunt, but here it is. History isn't a museum. It's a mirror. Stoicism doesn't ask you to replace one certainty with another. It asks for discipline, to sit with incomplete knowledge without reaching for comfort. The deepest bias isn't racial or cultural. It's temporal. We assume the present is smarter than the past, that we see clearer now. That assumption is lazy. Philosophers from Seneca to modern thinkers warned about this. Progress in tools doesn't mean progress in humility. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. Columbus didn't matter because he discovered. He mattered because he conquered. And conquest writes loudly. Once you understand that, the anger fades. So does the need to argue. What replaces it is responsibility. You don't inherit guilt for what happened. You inherit awareness. And awareness changes how you listen, read, and question. Ask yourself, when a story benefits power, do you pause? When a voice is missing, do you wonder why? Because the last discovery was never a continent. It's your ability to hold complexity without fear. And that discovery doesn't need permission, a monument, or a holiday. It just needs you to stay awake. Thank you very much for watching my video, and please like and subscribe to my channel.